Welcome to part 2 of the Substance for Beginners monster series, where we are painting this guy right here. Now you can be painting whatever model you want. It doesn't necessarily have to be this. You can use any of the techniques shown in this video for any of your 3D models, but I figured out what I want to do with this dude. So I made his inside kind of red. So here are the values if you want to copy these down. You don't have to, you can just pick a red color. And then I made the outside kind of like black almost. And the idea is I want to make like a lava dude. So what we're going to do is break this down into parts. So first let's do the inside. So I can actually delete this layer here, as well as this one. You want to have your 2 fill layers. That's really all you should need for now. We're going to add more. So the first thing I want to do is add some shadows. So let's add a new fill layer. We'll turn off everything except for color. And what I want to do is make this darker. So I want a darker color to paint into the red. So we're going to add a black mask. We can also name this shadows inside. And then what I want to do is pull up the shelf, go to brushes, and grab a nice, maybe this bark brush. Something that isn't too strong, that has like a nice texture to it, that's a little dynamic. And we can adjust the flow. I'll just set it to like 30. I think that'll be good for now. And I'll just start painting. So I want to get like these edges here. Maybe increase the flow a little bit more so I don't have to paint as much. So it just kind of comes out a little bit faster. So I'm going to use a kind of large brush and then press down with a certain level of sensitivity. So you, depending on how hard you want to press, you can just increase or decrease your flow and opacity. I usually use like a medium strength when I like push down to paint. So I'm gonna get some of these crevices. Add some shadow there. Just kind of add shadow where the shell meets the inside part. Just so we're doing something that's pretty reproducible, that's not like really specific. Basically just painting along the edge of the shell. So for now we're just doing the top. And we can actually edit the color too, so if we actually don't like the color we can edit it, and we can always erase. So this isn't permanent or set in stone, and of course you can delete and toggle off layers. So this is just for this like base layer. Let's get these eyes a little bit. Trying to just get parts that go in for the most part. Just add some shadow. Now there will be shadow on your model from the 3D light, like from 3D lighting, but this can add a little bit extra emphasis for certain parts. So now I'm just getting the eyes. You can use the brackets to increase and decrease brush size. Getting in the nostrils is usually good. Get this little like septum thing. Around the nose a little bit. eyebrows. Or really the brow ridge. The mouth. So the idea for this is I'm going to paint in some dark parts so it kind of looks like rock almost, and then I'm going to modify the mask so that it looks more like rock. And this is just to get like the color down, just so I can see what the color looks like. You can always duplicate the layer and then make a separate layer that just affects like the height, and then a separate layer that affects the roughness. So if you want to play with those settings individually. Alright, let's get the inside of the roof of the mouth. Let's start to get the bottom shell a little bit. We're going to refine this. This is just like to get started. And I'm holding an Alt and then tapping and dragging to rotate. Then I'm zooming in and out with middle mouse, holding down Alt to pan, and then Shift right click to rotate. You have to Shift right click and drag to rotate the light. So a lot of it is just like realigning the light and then painting in certain details at a certain point in time. It's like an easy way to think about the process. So like right now I'm just adding shadows. That's all I'm concerned with. Adding shadows for the inside part. I'm not caring about the shell yet. I will eventually, but not right now. This also helps create a better transition between the inside and the egg, so now it looks like it's not just like two solid colors meeting. The nice thing about the bake is it kind of gives you all these little ridges that you can put like little details in to emphasize things. Alright, so I'm just going to go through and just kind of look at this in general before I get into like more specific details. I think overall it looks okay. Alright, so I'm going to save it. And then one thing we can test if we want, is you can add a height. Use like a small value, like minus 0.1. So now we're painting in. And one thing you might notice is that the height is actually showing through this. And even if you set the height here, it still doesn't matter. So that's one thing about height that you need to be mindful of. Now there is a way to fix this, and I will show it. So right now we have a black mask, right? We're painting a black mask. And even though this layer is on top, height and certain properties will still show through. So one way to essentially force Substance Painter to not do this is to create a folder drop it in the folder, add a black mask, copy the mask, like in this case we're going to copy this mask, we'll paste into mask. So we copied the mask, right click, copy mask, right click, paste into mask. And what it should do, wait, where is our content? Hold on. Let me undo. Create the folder, drop it inside it, add a black mask, copy the mask, paste into mask. And what it should do is actually show us, okay, there it goes. It just didn't render yet. Now it's, so this is the opposite of what we want. So all you do is you right click it, you go to invert. So now you have a white mask where only this can be painted on, so that when you go to paint on this, it only stays inside, so you no longer have that issue. So to go over that process again, you have your black mask, you're painting in a height layer, which will show through certain materials and certain things it will show through, even if it's masked, even if this is like has a height and everything. So you create a folder, you copy the mask that you want to invert, you paste it into that, you add the mask to the folder, and then you invert the mask, and then it'll stay inside. Let's call it inverted mask. And then you still paint on this, but now it's just using a folder to prevent it from affecting the shell, because we don't want it to do that in this case. Alright, so now we can resume painting. And the nice thing about this brush now is we have height map, and then if we want to, we could also add roughness. But let's say we want to decrease the roughness so that when it gets to the darker parts, it's not as bright. So let's do like 0.75 just to see how that looks. And we could also make it darker because we can adjust this however we want. Now we have this like very extreme effect just from a single layer and just like a basic brush just painting on a mask. So we'll continue refining parts of this, and I'll try to connect some of the parts of the shadow together, like parts of these like finer details. And now when you sculpt in, you also have height map, so you're kind of getting this extra effect. And it can all be modified too, like you can adjust it. So like if you don't want the height to be as extreme, you can add like a 0, so like minus 0.01, and now it's very subtle. So you can really play around with the values. You have complete control in this situation to edit things after the fact. And you can even edit the mask. So like let's say you wanted to erase parts. It's the same thing as before. You just go down to the grayscale, switch it to black, and now you're erasing. So it's the exact same. It's the same process. It's very straightforward. It's non-destructive. It took me a minute to figure out this folder gimmick. It's so useful to do because like a lot of things will show through when you start painting on a height map. And if you already have these like clean masked edges, you can just rapidly like protect parts of the model from other parts. It's very nice, very useful to do. But the folder allows you to group content by what it needs to be. So in this case, we don't want the inside affecting the shell because the shell is going to have its own like physical properties as we're painting it. So now we have this barrier between them just by using a folder. Alright, so I'm going to try to refine parts of this. I might actually make this like a mid shadow, so I don't want this to be like as dark. I'll put a little bit of color into it. Sometimes you can add a little bit of color into shadow, like into shadows, because shadows usually aren't perfectly black. They usually have some color in them. So let's kind of make this more like a mid-tone. Maybe make it a little more red. Something like this, maybe? Yeah, that's not as extreme. And then, of course, if you don't want the height to be as crazy, you can You can also bump it up too. You can have the opposite effect where it pushes out, but we want it to sink in. And you can also make it super extreme, which looks crazy, but you can do a lot with just this fill layer. You can do a lot with masks, and that's kind of the point of a lot of these guides, is just to go over like how crazy masks are. All right, let's kind of look at the model for a second. So I am going to actually erase parts of it. Parts that I want to have like different details on, so I'll just kind of, and I'll use this brush so I can like transition things better. So if you paint on sections you don't want there to be like this color on, you can always just start removing the mask. And you can also customize what brush you use. So if you want to gradually remove it, or add like little micro detailing into things. So like for example, if you want to add like a little ridge here and here to kind of like stand out, or even like a little thing like this. So that way it goes from like dark to light to dark again, and like parts of it kind of stick out. You can do that. So you kind of create your own details as you go. So any parts that pop up, you can probably hit those with a little bit of the black to kind of reel them in. It can kind of give you a nice effect. And it's kind of like a balancing act between the two. So you don't want to just like paint everything in shadows. You want to have some parts that stick out, that look different. Especially if it like sticks up physically, because that would be more likely to reflect light because of the surface of it. And any parts that look bad, you can just paint away. So like if you don't like this section, you just paint it away. If you don't like a certain transition on the model between how it interacts with like the details you're putting on there. So right now I'm not actually painting anything, I'm just removing the mask. So I'm just like, I'm not necessarily adding new detail, I'm just modifying the mask with a black brush. And this is also non-destructive because it's all just in this mask. So you can get a lot done just with fill layers and masks, and that's kind of like the overall theme of the video. Fill layers and masks are a really good thing to make use of. If you just, the thing I used to do when I first started doing texturing was I would just like paint everything in like a paint layer, which is extremely hard to make changes to. So it's like if you want to try out different colors on a character or something, and you like paint something for like a few hours, you can't just like go and change it. You have to repaint it because it's just like in a layer. Now there's things you can kind of do to get around that, like using blending modes, but it's still a very destructive way to work. Whereas with this, at any point in time, I can make this blue right now if I wanted to. And nothing's gonna stop me from doing that. And you can kind of blend in parts of this to break up the shadows. Because like if things are too messy, like it kind of looks just like murky, where it just is just like too much shadow for no reason. Like there really wouldn't be that much shadow right here. There'd be some along the edges, but breaking it up is good. Not always, like there are like hard and fast rules on certain things, but for something like this is like a stylized character, but you should still try to have some degree of realism. So like if this is all just like solid black, it would look weird. So I need to add like a little bit of highlights in these sections here by removing the shadow and the mask. And the nice thing is you can like overshoot the thing you're trying to shade and then just refine the edges, so that way you get the shadows you want relatively quickly. And then with the edge refinement, you get these nice little details to break up the shape a little bit. But a lot of this is just from like the sculpt, so like most of these little details were from the sculpt, and then they're now showing up in the bake, which I'm now then making use of in this final model. So just a little bit more refining, and then I would say we're ready to move on to the next section, which will be a new video, because I need to do different things each video where I show like one step of the process, and in this case we're just painting on a mask, which is useful to know, and I went over like the main topics of the video, I would say. So you can also always toggle it off to see like what effect it's actually having on the model. So in this case, because like it can be hard to tell, but you can see what it does to the model by doing that. Just by toggling it really quick. And as you're removing parts, you might want to add them. Like you might want to add some parts around this tongue here, so like do something like that. Maybe around the lips. I'll go back to removing to refine it a little bit. And this isn't like the end of the inside part, we're going to do more to it. This is just like to get it started. This is just to get some details on there, to start breaking up the surface, to start adding some height details as well as some color details, because the note we did add color to the shadow, so that does change the color of the shadows just a little bit. And the reason that's important is very few things are a solid color. So even if something appears to be like a red fire hydrant, there's still like other things going on with it, especially if it's like rusting. So there's like more to color than you would think. Like even like skin has different tones and micro details and all these other things going on with it that are kind of subtle, that if you look at it closely you can see like red and, you know, different colors in the skin aside from the main color you think the skin is. The same is true here, right? Like this little lava dude, you know, he's starting off like this, but we're gonna make him look crazy. So this is just like a foundation layer, I want to say. And then we have this nice folder that we can put everything into now for like making edits to the actual guy. You can add little details here. The other thing that's cool too is now that there's height, when you erase, you're essentially adding height. So like when you erase on this by painting in black, erasing the mask, you're essentially adding in little height sections. So as you rotate the camera, you can see, or the light, you can see that it's affecting these like areas that you're essentially removing, because it's just returning it to its normal default height value, which in this case is 0. But there's a difference now because this detail has a reduced height. So if you erase on there, you now have height information, which allows you to get these cool little details like that. And you can like make little subtle marks to get little height in there as well, which is pretty nice. The other thing you want to avoid are like repeating patterns too. Like if you're painting or sculpting in patterns, nature usually doesn't create patterns in designs unless it's like something like hands or like certain skeleton structures and stuff like that. So things usually, like especially if you want something to look organic, it shouldn't have repeating elements. So for example, if I had two details that were like that, just everywhere, it would look weird. So you want to have like weird or different kind of organic details and try to be asymmetrical with your details. Alright. So this is what we added in this video. So we'll actually toggle it on and off so you can see. So here is, it's gonna take a second. This is before. It's the solid fill color. Then here's after. So you can see the difference here. Now this is just one layer. We're going to be adding more, but this is just to get us started because you want to work in layers so that if you want to make changes to a layer, you can, and also you do it in order. Like you can start with like shadows and then add like midtones and add highlights. So like for the midtones, I probably won't even add height information, or if I do, it'll be like a very slight subtle value, like 0.0 something. Like 0.01 for example, to add like midtone height changes. And then for the highlights you could actually add, so you could increase by like a positive value like 0.01 and then use like a texture brush just like this. So we're starting, so we have our base fill color and then we have this new shadow layer, which is very mysterious and ominous. But that's pretty much it for this one. In the next one, we're going to be going through the midtones. So right now, we have the shadows and the base color. We're going to add midtones, which are just kind of like mid-range details. Now it's going to look very similar to the base color. It'll just be slightly different just for some variety. And then we're going to add highlights as a separate layer in another follow-up video. So definitely like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this or found this useful. I'm going to be making a bunch of different guides for Substance Painter and ZBrush in general, but I'm going to be finishing this series probably this week, so definitely be on the lookout for that, and I'll see you in the next one.